So welcome everyone. My name is Hannah Scott. I'm the program director at the Center for Cooperatives in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences at Ohio State University. We're so excited that you've joined us this afternoon for an online session of the Appalachia Cooperates Initiative, this online learning opportunity. So let's jump into introductions. As I mentioned, I'm with the Center for Cooperatives in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences at Ohio State. Our mission is to extend knowledge and technical assistance to emerging and existing cooperatives by integrating the core areas of our college, so teaching, research, and extension or outreach education. And we are actually located at the OSU South Centers in Piketon, Ohio, which is in the southeastern part of the state. Piketon, the OSU South Centers, has program areas in business development, which is where our team is located. But we also have programming in aquaculture, horticulture, and soil and water and bioenergy. So you can certainly learn more about all of those areas and programming at southcenters.osu.edu. I encourage you to take a look. There's a lot of great resources there. So we're here today as part of the Cooperates Initiative, which is a learning network connecting cooperative and community and business and economic developers and advocates in Central Appalachia. The goal of this really is to contribute to the development of a thriving co-op ecosystem in our region in Central Appalachia by building awareness of the co-op model. So just helping folks become more knowledgeable about the co-op model or to see applications of the co-op model, by equipping practitioners with knowledge and skills around cooperative development and cooperative resources, and by facilitating a connected network of co-op and community developers, people interested in this space. And I do want to thank many partners who have been a part of this initiative. It was really born out of a collaborative dialogue of partners in Ohio and West Virginia and Pennsylvania. It's been cooperative in how it arose and how it's moved forward. So we welcome all those partners. If you're here today, thank you so much for your engagement. And today we're excited to be exploring the topic, building a community economy, exploring worker and community ownership models. And we're joined by Vera. Ellen is with us from Co-op Cincy, where she's the Director of Development and Co-op Organizing. And Ellen has organized people from diverse backgrounds to improve their workplaces for more than a decade, and is actually a co-founder of Co-op Cincy and One Worker, One Vote, with the goal of developing a more sustainable model of organizing, economic democracy, and wealth building within marginalized communities. So in her role, Ellen oversees new co-op organizing projects, the launch of Co-op Cincy's education arm, Co-op U, and makes sure we have the resources we need to be successful in co-op communities that she works with. So Ellen, thanks so much for being with us. And we're so excited to learn more about your work and to dive deeper into the worker co-op model. So thanks.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So to kick things off, we know that Zoom is not the most participatory avenue, and oftentimes in the cooperative community, we like to create dialogue if we can. So we're going to launch a couple of polls that will help us get to know who's in the audience this afternoon. And hopefully so that we can tailor some of our conversation and address some of your interests a little bit better going forward. So if you would, please share by selecting the role that best describes your connection to the cooperative, business, or economic development community. And we have a number there, but of course we couldn't get everything. So hopefully that captures many folks who are on today. And we'd also love to understand what you're interested in learning about related to the cooperative model. So if there are specific areas that you would like to see resources or learning opportunities, or even in the conversation today, feel free to share those in the poll. So I have a good mix of folks. So some folks that are cooperative developers, some who are in economic development, a couple who are in education or extension or maybe government roles, So that's great. And looks like interest in worker cooperative models. Of course, we're going to spend some time on that today. The cooperative startup process. That's always an interesting conversation, as well as other areas, business conversion. So thanks so much for sharing. I'm going to end that poll. Thanks, Brad. And jump into the program. So what we want to start out with today is really just a baseline for talking about the cooperative model, because cooperatives are diverse and they're embedded in many communities across the United States, including rural and urban communities. Of course, in the Appalachia Cooperates Initiative context, we're focused on rural communities, particularly in Central Appalachia, but we know that there are an estimated about 64,000 cooperatives across the United States. That's based on some work by colleagues at the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives. Cooperatives are estimated to employ just over 850,000 employees. And we'll talk in detail about some of the sectors that cooperatives operate within. But really, cooperatives operate in every economic sector, I think, that you can think of in the United States. So there are cooperatives in housing, in insurance, in transportation, healthcare, grocery, finance, art, agriculture. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. We're going to talk about more, but really, we're not going to be able to get to all of that diversity, but we want to showcase really a couple of different models of cooperatives through the worker ownership and community-owned models. But when we're talking about the cooperative model, there are many definitions out there. There are two here on the screen that I find really helpful. The first is from the International Cooperative Alliance, pointing out that cooperatives are autonomous associations of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations using a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So that definition actually embeds many of the globally recognized cooperative principles that I'll show you on the next slide that make cooperatives unique. This second definition is a bit more concise, a little easier to remember. It's from the US Department of Agriculture, and it highlights that cooperatives are user-owned, user-controlled, and meant to benefit their users, really. So kind of three components in that definition: that user ownership, user control, and user benefit. So as I mentioned, cooperatives are across the United States. We do see some geographic concentrations of cooperatives. Here in Ohio, our team did a project about a year ago that estimates that there's about 452 cooperatives headquartered in the state of Ohio, with just over 1,100 physical locations where cooperatives are operating. And that is available, that information is available. You can actually see a map and a list of the cooperatives that we identified through that project online on our website. And we'll share the link for that in the chat function. So this list of 7 principles here is it's a set of internationally recognized principles that are put forward by the International Cooperative Alliance, but really put forward by the cooperative community. And it's these principles help define what makes cooperatives unique compared to other business models. And these principles really are a set of values that help determine how cooperative businesses are going to be run. And they impact how cooperatives really engage in the work that they do, like how they go about doing their business and how they go about doing their governance. So we don't have time to go through all of these, but a couple of them I want to highlight. Cooperative principle number 2 is one that you saw in the definition of cooperatives on that first slide. So democratic member control. Cooperatives are jointly owned enterprises, and joint ownership of enterprise is not necessarily all that unique compared to other business models, right? There's other ways for people to jointly own businesses. One of the things that makes cooperatives unique is that joint ownership is governed in a democratic manner. So usually that means that the owners come together in a one member, one vote system. So regardless of investment, regardless of the amount of business done with the cooperative, each of the members of the cooperative have one vote. And that allows control to be exercised across the entire cooperative in a democratic manner. Some cooperatives use other democratic structures, maybe not a one member, one vote system. That's less common, but all cooperatives work in this kind of democratic member control space. The third principle is also really important. That's member economic participation. One of the hallmarks of the cooperative model is that user benefit, or the way that members access the benefits of the cooperative, is unique to the cooperative business model. So members, they participate by doing business with the cooperative. So we'll talk about some examples of the ways that happens. But they also then reap the benefits of the cooperative economically, as well as through whatever services the cooperative provides. And those economic benefits, usually in the form of profits or surplus, are shared based on use of the business. So that's also different from other business models often, where profit sharing might happen on the basis of investment, for example, is a common way to do that. In the cooperative business model, that profit sharing model is based on use of the business. So these principles really inform how cooperatives do their work, inform how they engage their membership, and inform how they engage their communities. And if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to take a look at the International Cooperative Alliance and learn more about those principles. And also, I want to point out, as we're talking about worker cooperatives, of course, there's worker cooperatives also put forward a set of 10 principles, particularly put forward by the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain, that I think we'll have some time to talk maybe a little bit more about, that Ellen can share with us. So when we think about cooperatives, we often think about them according to their forms of ownership. So according to the people who are the members of the cooperatives. So there are many types of cooperatives. For example, there are purchasing cooperatives that independent business owners or individuals use to come together to purchase supplies or inputs more economically. So often that's purchasing in bulk to realize cost savings on a unit basis. So perhaps it's wholesale cooperatives, for example, that supply lumber or hardware to their independent business members. So, for example, brands like Ace Hardware and Do It Best would be recognizable to many folks in the audience. Those are cooperatives. Producer cooperatives provide important services to producers like marketing, supply, production, and purchasing services. And those can be producers of any type. So oftentimes we might think about those as agricultural producers, which is a very important segment of the cooperative space. There are agricultural cooperatives doing everything from marketing specialty crops to turning dairy into value-added products and marketing those to end consumers, to providing energy and inputs to farmers across the United States. But there are also producer cooperatives like artist cooperatives, for example, where artists come together to market their art, to jointly access space, for example, to show their artwork and to obtain supplies together. So those producer cooperatives can play an important function for all different types of producers. There are also financial services cooperatives, like credit unions, for example, that are owned by their customers who use their services. So credit unions are quite active across the country. And here in Ohio, I think we have about 250 different credit unions. So in many communities across the state. So this is a list that just helps highlight the many forms of cooperative ownership, from producer to consumer to public service to worker and multi-stakeholder. And I want to take a couple of minutes to dive into worker cooperatives, consumer cooperatives, and really social and public service cooperatives that are also a form of community-based cooperatives. So worker cooperatives are businesses where worker members own most of the equity and control the voting shares of the business while participating in profit sharing and oversight, sometimes to some degree management, all using those democratic practices that we talked about. There are worker-owned cooperatives in the Appalachian region that range from restaurants and coffee shops to bookstores and music stores and bakeries and more. And I want to show a short video of some recognizable faces in the cooperative community. Some of you will likely recognize these folks from Casa Nueva in Athens, Ohio. This video was made as a part of a project we did about a year ago, actually, to help young people get to know the cooperative business model. So let's hear from a couple of folks at Casa Nueva about their worker-owned co-op.
Casa Nueva in Athens, Ohio is a lot of different things. It's a co-op. It's a restaurant that focuses on organic and sustainable and local food. And it's also Mexican inspired.
So the best part of being in a cooperative is just the people. The fact that we're operating at the speed of trust, that we care deeply about one another and we're trying to do good work together. The hardest part of being in a cooperative is that we're working together and we're trying to figure out what's best for us, both as individuals, and what's best for the business and what's best for the cooperative. It is a very fascinating story. I and a number of other folks had been employed at a restaurant business called Casa Que Pasa, which had started in the 1970s. And the handwriting was on the wall that that business was going to fail. So myself and a number of other employees started working with a new nonprofit organization called the Worker-Owned Network. And we were able, by June of 1985, to incorporate as a C corporation and then organize our governance structure as a worker-owned business.
Well, a worker-owned cooperative gives workers the opportunity to become owners of the business. There's no outside owners, there's no outside shares. The people that own the business, profit from the business, work at the business.
Everyone participates in shift work and decision-making processes that shape the work itself.
It means that one owner becomes one cooperative member, creates one shareholder, and has one vote. And I think what we found out was running a business is hard, that looking at business ownership as opposed to being an employee in a business is a lot different. And then trying to organize that as a worker co-op where everyone has an opinion, everyone has different skills, everyone has different initiative. And I think when a lot of our youth are determining, can I really create a livelihood? Are there jobs here in rural Ohio? I think we often have the sense that, oh no, we've got to leave. We've got to go to a metropolitan area. So we've created livelihoods that allows people, purchase a home or a farm to build their families, to educate their kids.
So Casa Nueva is one of the older examples of a worker cooperative in Ohio. And we're going to talk much more about worker cooperatives when Ellen shares more about the work of Co-op Cincy, and then we have an opportunity for dialogue. So that's just one example here in Southeast Ohio. Consumer cooperatives are another form of cooperatives that can be active across communities. And one prime example of consumer cooperatives are food and grocery co-ops. There are food and grocery cooperatives that are owned by the community of people who shop there. And in some cases, there are food and grocery cooperatives that can be owned by producers who are selling food through the cooperative, and in some cases, even by multiple groups of stakeholders, for example, both producers and the community who shops there. So for example, here in Worcester, Ohio, Local Roots Market and Cafe is a retail food store that's organized as a cooperative and sells produce and meats and dairy and more, often from local and regional farmers and food producers. As their name indicates, they also operate a cafe and a shared use commercial kitchen. And that enterprise, that location, that store is owned by both community members. So if you want to support that in their community, the folks who shop there, as well as the farmers and food producers who market their wares through the cooperative. And community ownership, the community ownership part of food cooperatives is really a hallmark of the sector. And when we think about the potential benefits of community-owned grocery stores or cooperative grocery stores, there's some interesting research out of the University of California, Davis, looking at cooperatives, really looking more broadly than that, at efforts to develop food stores or grocery stores in food deserts, a term that's been used to describe areas or neighborhoods or communities that lack access to full service grocery stores. This happens in both rural communities and urban communities and has received a lot of attention in recent decades. This study actually identified grocery stores that were working to open in locations that were classified as food deserts beginning in 2000. And those efforts were classified by how they were driven, whether they were driven by government or community or nonprofits or commercial interests. And interestingly, all of the stores that were opened by community or nonprofits remained open at the time of this study, which I think came out in 2021 or 2020. Nearly half of the commercial stores and about a third of the government-driven stores didn't make it beyond the planning phases or had closed by the time of the study. And the authors of this study really pointed to the community engagement piece as important for this. So 16 of the 18 community-driven cases were actually structured as cooperatives. And when trying to explain that, when thinking about why that might be, the authors pointed out that cooperatives often adopt local hiring practices, they pay living wages, and they help residents counteract inequities in the food system. And their model, where often about a third of the cost of operating typically comes from member loans, helps ensure that communities are invested in their stores and in their use. And so they surmise that the model helped to ensure that community engagement and thus success. So food co-ops are doing a lot of purchasing from local farmers. The National Co-op Grocer, which is the organization that represents food co-ops across the United States, for 2020 estimates that local products were about 22% of the average food co-op sales, and that the average food co-op works with about 185 local farms and producers. So those community-owned stores really are providing benefits in a number of ways to their communities. And then quickly, I just want to highlight that there are social and public service cooperatives that are working in communities across the country. These are housing cooperatives, cooperatively organized schools, healthcare cooperatives that are helping to bring access to their communities to the services that they provide. So for example, in that cooperative census project I mentioned here in Ohio, we estimate that there are about 36 cooperatively organized schools where parents or parent groups are coming together to provide education and childcare potentially to their children. There is also a model by the organization ROC USA, ROC, which stands for Resident-Owned Communities, that's working to help residents of manufactured home communities cooperatively own the land where those communities are situated in order to give those communities more control over the future of those communities. So those are just examples of how cooperatives are engaged in social and public services in their communities, in both rural and urban spaces, really. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ellen. We'll come back to this slide to think about why folks might organize cooperatively. But I want us to take a deeper dive into work cooperative sector and thinking about worker co-ops. And I'd like to turn it to Ellen and the expertise at Co-op Cincy to share more about that with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hannah. So great to see everybody here today. I'm also going to share my screen here so you guys can see some slides as I kind of introduce our organization, and then we can kind of get into some of the nitty gritty. But as Hannah mentioned, my name is Ellen Vera. I'm one of the co-founders of Co-op Cincy. In addition to helping secure the resources needed to do this work for our organization, I also lead up all of our transitions of existing businesses to worker ownership and a lot of our childcare co-op work. So great to meet you guys all today. So who is Co-op Cincy? We are a nonprofit cooperative business incubator that creates and supports a network of worker-owned businesses. So that's the main form of co-op business that we work on. We also work on multi-stakeholder, bringing in both community and workers. And really, we do this to truly build an economy that works for all and try to create, family sustaining jobs, really provide ownership opportunities to underserved and marginalized groups, and really nurture businesses that are accountable to our community. This is just kind of a diagram of what the Co-op Cincy network currently looks like. We actually have 13. I need to update that slide. We have 13 co-ops and growing. These are all some of the logos there. Everything from childcare to apparel to farming to construction to residential cleaning and more. We have our own loan fund that we operate. That's a part of a national loan fund that help us to deploy resources for our co-ops. And I'm going to talk about some of these other programs here on the next slides. So we have three kind of main strategies about how we try to really increase the number of co-ops in our state and in our area. So one is through the launch of new co-op businesses. I know some of you guys mentioned that you're interested in the startup, how to start new co-op businesses, and that is really what this program is focused on. So we have a 14-week co-op development course where we take people through step-by-step teams of individuals, how to kind of dig into that co-op idea, really test it, shape it, get out in the market, try it out, put together a business plan, put together their financial model, and then work to get the financing to launch it. We provide a lot of ongoing technical assistance to those individuals. And then, like I mentioned before, we have our loan fund that can support a lot of those entities as they launch, if they're in kind of our geographic area. As I mentioned, I help lead up our transitions work. So we work with existing businesses to help them transition to worker ownership. So we work directly with business owners and kind of help them identify if this is the right fit for them, help them understand the value of their business, help them walk through step by step, kind of what it will look like to transition to their workers, and then help to finance those deals as well. And I think we're going to go into a little bit later, just kind of the nitty gritty of all those steps to make that happen. And then our third strategy is supporting our existing co-ops. So once any of these new co-ops form, we provide wraparound technical assistance and support to really help them build co-op culture within these co-op owned businesses. So even though we structure something as a co-op, if we're not truly living that out, if we're not putting the structures in place for it to be truly democratically run, it won't truly be that, right? So helping to build that co-op culture, helping to help the folks within the co-op really understand how their business works through financial and business literacy and planning and other supports. So those are the main things that we do at Co-op Cincy. I wanted to kind of share with you guys kind of what it feels like to be a co-op worker on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully I will do this right. If you can't hear it, let me know.
This is my first time working at a farm, and it's a cooperative farm where everybody works together and is more unified, and I really appreciate it because it feels like I'm kind of at home here. I feel very comfortable, and we all work together extremely well as a team, and I feel like this is something I'm supposed to be doing rather than just going to work, and that makes me feel really good.
Well, all farms need a team, but to have a cooperative, you really feel a part of the ownership, because I've always worked on someone else's farms, and to work in a co-op is a chance to really have your voice heard and to make suggestions and to know that you are part of that farm and to own that farm. Having the decisions being made by other workers from the ground up means that there's no filter of information in a hierarchy being lost. It just makes a lot of sense for the actual workers to be making the decisions on the farm.
Hi, my name is Tia Coleman. I've been with Our Harvest for a little over a year. And to me, being part of a co-op makes sense because you matter. Your opinion matters, you're valued. You're not just another worker that's there to get the job done.
Out of all my jobs I ever had, this job here treated me the most fair. Then they offered me a part of being an owner, of his company. So it was a no-brainer to stay here. Everybody that I've come in contact with through either co-op, especially Our Harvest, treated me, like family, and that's really important to me. So that's why I decided to stay here and stick it out with Our Harvest, because they showed me love, so I'm showing them love, staying here working with them.
I would just say that it's a family, and that's what a worker-owner business does. It creates families, not just workers, and it supports actual families, and that's pretty much all I'll say. But then just one caveat is that our worker-owners at the food hub, they actually work with their families, and I think that's just really beautiful. You don't have a lot of businesses that do that, so worker families and actual families.
Okay. So that's one of our initial co-ops that we started at Our Harvest farm and food hub, as you guys could see, but hearing a little bit from them of kind of what it's like. So that's a kind of an overview of Co-op Cincy, what we do. I know I have more slides on the network and the process around conversions, but I didn't know, Hannah, if you wanted to ask me any questions before we get into that part. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen, for sharing the work of Co-op Cincy and the model of Our Harvest. I think one question that I would like maybe to think about before we dive into the specifics of conversions is to just understand, if you could describe for us the process for how people become members in a worker co-op, and share with us. I think sometimes there's this misconception that everybody who works at a worker-owned business is also a worker owner. So if you could help us understand that.
Yeah. So as you just pointed out, that is not true. So within any worker co-op, it's kind of a two-way relationship, right? So it has to be that the existing owners in the co-op have to feel like a new individual who's coming in is a good fit. And so typically they have some types of requirements, like they have to have been there for a certain period of time. Oftentimes it's 6 months to a year. They could have requirements like they need to maybe work full-time versus part-time, or that they have to kind of attend co-op education trainings and things like that. But then once they've kind of met those initial requirements, then those existing members would kind of vote and say, okay, do we want to invite this person in or not? And then that person would also make the decision, is this a good fit for me? Do I want to become a worker owner? So in all of our co-ops, I would say that there's definitely, workers that you kind of said, ownership is maybe not what I want to do right now. Maybe I got a lot on my plate, or I'm only going to be here for a certain period of time. So you can have both workers alongside, worker owners. And that's totally normal. And then the other piece that they typically have is a buy-in, so a membership share. And so each co-op sets that amount. So our co-ops often range from about, for some startups as little as $250 to some of the more developed businesses up to, $5,000 or $6,000. But it's something that, each co-op kind of decides for themselves what makes sense in terms of, people putting some skin in the game.
Yeah, that's helpful. So you referenced in your slides, and then I think we've heard throughout that cooperatives, worker cooperatives in particular, can get started in a number of ways, right? So they can happen through an organic startup process. They can be startups that are incubated. They could be conversions from existing businesses, and really others as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between kind of startup cooperatives that are brand new businesses and conversions from existing businesses? And then perhaps we can think a little more about the specific process of conversions to worker cooperatives.
Yeah, definitely. So, in terms of those two main ways that co-ops typically get created, a startup is kind of, I would say, in many ways, very similar to any other startup process. So where you have a group of people come together around a business idea and then really have to kind of go step by step of putting that plan together, putting that financial model together, and then having to raise the capital to launch that initial business. What I would say is like maybe different about or kind of the unique part about a co-op is that this is typically done if it's going to be a co-op with more than just one individual. So it's not just one entrepreneur. We usually want at least teams of 2 or 3 that go through like our co-op business course. And in addition to kind of thinking about, okay, what is the product I'm going to be, selling, and who is the exact customer, and really digging into that and coming up with that plan around it, is also just thinking through like, okay, what is the governance going to look like? Are we going to be kind of in terms of incorporation, are we going to be incorporated as a legal entity that's a co-op, or are we going to be an LLC or a corporation that's structured as a co-op? So, those are some of the other things that people think about as they're launching like a startup. When it comes to transitioning an existing business to work ownership, you already have a business that's up and going and functioning, already has workers and leadership. So that's really thinking about like, is that leadership in place? Are the workers there interested in becoming the owners of the business? And I would think to really dig that, it probably makes sense for me to show my slides kind of about the process itself. So let me just pull it up here because I think that'll be helpful for people to kind of see what that transition process looks like. Okay, so this is kind of how we break it down, kind of a 5-step process if it's an existing business. But the first piece is really exploring compatibility. So really understanding what are the goals of that owner. Does that really align with, kind of selling to their workers? So do they care about their legacy? Do they care about the folks that helped them build this business and want it to kind of be preserved in that community for the long haul? We, in our transitions, we pay a fair market value for the business. So, if the owner is only motivated by getting the best price, the most they possibly can get, and and that is above what might be a fair market value, that, this might not be the right fit for them. But it's not, it's not all about charity. It's about saying, what's going to help this business, kind of stick around for the long haul, and be something that, and for a lot of business owners, they don't have a lot of options when it comes to selling. And so this can be a really great option, in addition to being able to preserve that legacy and those jobs. So once we've kind of identified that we're all on the same page around that, this is, this meets the goals and the values, then we really kind of start to dig in around assessing the feasibility. So kind of looking into saying, okay, do we have workers inside this business that are interested? What would that structure look like? Really digging into the financials and making sure that we're like that, we have maybe an initial value that we come to, but that as we kind of peel back the layers and dig in, is that truly the value of the business? So making sure that all those things match up and make sense. And then once we kind of all agree around that, and that seems like, it's all working and all going in the right direction, then we start to really build out that plan. So kind of that business plan for how we're going to transition this business. So, kind of making all those documents around the sales agreement and the governance structure, making sure people really understand how we're going to transition the relationships and the knowledge and everything that the owner has to the workers there. And so kind of putting a plan for step by step how we're going to do that. And then once all of those pieces are together, together. It's about finalizing that deal and securing the financing, making sure that all comes together. And then once the deal is done and that transition has taken place, is all of that co-op culture work that has to happen. So, helping the workers understand their role, the financial literacy, the business literacy, and typically owners, are going to be engaged in some way for a period of time, the old owner, to make sure that all those things are happening, that knowledge transition, all those things are happening in a way that will help folks be successful. So that's the typical process for transitioning an existing business.
That's really helpful to kind of understand the details there. And something that I wanted to highlight for the group here is that there are many in the cooperative community and the worker cooperative community thinking more and more about this conversion from existing business to existing other form of business to a worker cooperative enterprise as it relates to succession planning for business owners who might be looking for an exit strategy, particularly around retirement. Many of you may have heard the statistics that about half of privately held businesses in the United States are owned by baby boomers, who are currently in and going through that retirement age. And so that will be a very large transition of business ownership and wealth. Here in Ohio, it's estimated that about 54% of private businesses, which is about an estimated 94,000 firms, are owned by people who are in that retirement age. And so this is something that folks who are thinking about the legacies around those businesses and the economic context around those businesses and all the things that those businesses support, including jobs for their workers and the communities that they are in, are thinking about the succession planning and worker ownership as a potential part of that. And so Ellen, I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Ohio Worker Ownership Network and the Building Legacies report as a part of that context.
Perfect. Almost like we planned this. So excitingly, I think, Ohio is a pretty awesome place to be if you're wanting to build a worker-owned co-op. We have it kicked off right as the pandemic was hitting, but a new statewide organization called the Ohio Worker Ownership Network, or OWN. And we have 10 organizations across Ohio that are, working directly to help build these types of worker-owned businesses. So pretty exciting. These are all the different organizations that are kind of in the network, but you can see we're kind of spread out across the state. We'd love to have a few more kind of in the central and eastern side. So if any of you guys are in that area and you want to kind of help make that happen, and also in kind of the northwestern area, we'd love to have you guys join. But the network itself is offering technical assistance, especially to one another. So helping different co-op developers gain different skills and learn about different things. We all have different areas that we have built expertise in. We do joint training with one another. We help support each other on just different deals and things that we're working with. There's also access to some loan money depending on where you are in the state. And there's about 24 different worker-owned businesses that are a part of all these different co-op developers and their networks. And then the report, as you were mentioning, I encourage you guys to check it out, but it's called The Building Legacies. It was published last year by the network, but kind of really digging into kind of what are their key economic barriers that we're seeing in Ohio. So as Hannah was just saying, this baby boomer crisis, succession crisis, having so much precarious employment in our state, and just this huge spike in wealth inequality, not different than obviously anywhere else, unfortunately, in the country, but we really wanted to dig into what does it look like in Ohio. So as Hannah mentioned, more than half of all baby boomer owned businesses are planning to retire in the next decade. So, and what studies show is about 80% of those lack an actual formal succession plan. So a lot of them are at risk. Again, that's 54% of the businesses, 94,000 firms employing 2.6 million, and nationwide more than 2 million businesses employing 25 million are owned by baby boomers. So it's definitely something we should all be taking note of for sure. We've broken it out, in the report by kind of area of the state. So I think this is a great way to also be able to talk to folks about it, just really understand what does it look like in terms of number of firms, employees, payroll, and sales. But it, can really kind of see in your part of the state, how does that impact? And, some of the other things that we think kind of tying all this together, why worker ownership is so important, but that, a 2019 study showed that half of all workers between the ages of 18 to 64, are only making around $18,000. The wage stagnation has been going on for at least 4 decades. We have all these low paying jobs, and that women and people of color are disproportionately affected. And obviously the pandemic has impacted that even more. So having such precarious work conditions and such a spike in wealth inequality, as we've talked about, since the 1980s, the wealth inequality that we've never seen these, levels since the 1980s. And so you can see that, the top wage earners have accounted for 86% of all the income gains, while the bottom 90% have really seen negative income growth. And so, the white households have, an average of 10 times more wealth than Black or Hispanic households. So, all these things coming together, we feel like worker ownership is really a way that, can impact a lot of these things in a really positive way. And so, we can deal with this issue around the baby boomer succession crisis. We can, really improve working conditions for workers by broadening ownership to a much broader group of individuals. And by having ownership, in these companies, we can really help people, actually do some wealth building, which is really important. So that's the report itself. This is our transition program called This is Legacy Fund. But I think that's all I got on that. Those stuff.
Great. And that link, there's a link in the chat for those of you who are interested in reading that report. It's available online. And there's also a link in the chat to another report around business conversions to worker cooperatives from Project Equity, which is an organization that does this work on the West Coast. But this report has case studies of business conversions from across the country that are really interesting, including a couple from Ohio. If you want to kind of learn more about the different ways that businesses have gone through this and the different motivators really for business owners to look at conversions from existing business to worker-owned cooperative. And so I do want to reiterate that if you have a question, feel free to put that in the Q&A, and we have time here to answer some questions. But just briefly, I want to share, Ellen was just sharing some motivations for thinking about worker cooperative conversions from existing businesses. As we think about motivations around community-owned cooperatives or startup cooperatives, there are a myriad of reasons that people might think about the cooperative model, but commonly some of those reasons are focused on pooling resources to access, maybe it's supplies, maybe it's services, maybe it is marketing abilities or new market channels at reasonable costs, for example, that perhaps individuals weren't able to access those services previously or to access them in a way that was usable for them or in a way that they wanted to be accessing those services. Also, to share benefits with member owners. The cooperative model, as I mentioned, shares profits or surplus back with member owners based on use. And so that's a core principle in the cooperative business model, as is the democratic structure. So doing this joint enterprise in a way that is democratic. So all of those can be motivators for folks who are thinking about the cooperative business model. So I do want to make sure that we have time to turn to your questions before we wrap up. So I see that we have in the Q&A, and if you have questions that come up or have come up, feel free to put those in the Q&A. So here in the Q&A, we have a question around what do you think the potential is for policy work on worker first right of refusal in sales? So that's an interesting question. I guess, Ellen, I'd love to know kind of what your thoughts are there, particularly around state level policies might be the place where we see this coming up, but kind of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I have not seen a big effort around actually putting into like a statewide or even a local policy that workers should have a first right of refusal to buy a business. I mean, that would be, I think, really interesting. I know that one of the things that, people could do, especially if there's like a union contractor in place or something like that, like through like a local union, they could try to bargain for that, right? They could put that into their union contract and say, the workers want to have first right of refusal to buy the business. So I know that there's been a movement kind of within the labor movement to try and get that to be more common practice. Not always super successfully, because there's always tons of things at the bargaining table that they're trying to get, but I know that's been an option. On like the things that have been most typical on a policy level right now that's been seeing success is that we had the Main Street Employee Ownership Act on a national level that was passed to say that, kind of all of our SBAs and SBDCs should be including employee ownership and worker ownership as kind of the repertoire of what their services for businesses are, and sharing that information with business owners. So I think that's definitely a positive thing that, has happened. On what we're seeing on like mostly on, I would say, a city basis, but I think there has been some movement on some of the statewide as well, is like getting actual resources towards supporting loan funds and technical assistance to help businesses transition. But I've not seen anything on actually like mandating, workers to have the right to buy a business, but that'd be pretty cool.
Interesting. Thank you. So, as I mentioned, feel free to share your questions in the Q&A. But before we lose people for time, I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. I did want to just share a couple of items. First, our contact information. If you would like to learn more, please get in touch with us. Our contact information, my contact information is here on the screen. Email is the best way to reach me. And then, of course, our website and social media have more information. So please do feel free to get in touch. But importantly, I wanted to share that the Appalachia Cooperates Initiative program has been doing learning events quarterly, and we plan to continue doing those learning events quarterly. Web-based has been really successful, so many of those are recorded, and you can see more about the initiative and recordings of past events. So for example, one of our past events was thinking about the Mondragon cooperative model in the Basque region of Spain, and how we could maybe learn from that model here in Central Appalachia. So that recording is available on our website, and you can access that at the link here on your screen, which is go.osu.edu/Appalachia Cooperates. And as a part of this initiative, we have been hosting monthly networking calls that are really just to create a space on a regular basis for folks who are interested in building cooperatives in Central Appalachia to get together, to share resources, to learn from each other, to ask questions, share best practices, and we're planning to host more of these. So this is the schedule for April, May, and June coming up. If you would like to be a part of those calls, they're informal, but they're spaces where folks who join can come to share their perspective or ask questions of the group. You can register at the link for each of them on Tuesday, April 26th, Tuesday, May 17th, and Friday, June 17th. We'll be getting together as a part of that work. So I just want to make sure we're not missing any questions. Feel free, again, to put those in the chat, or excuse me, in the Q&A. And I just want to say thank you so much for your engagement today. We hope the session was useful. We hope to see you at other learning opportunities or on these network calls.